Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a few folks who are still joining this webinar. We are hosting this at Archiving the Black Web. This is our Freedom School series. This is the first part of our series. Today's conversation and workshop is focused on web archiving tools. We have our amazing panelists with us here, Lorena Ramirez, and we're just going to wait 2 more minutes to let the rest of these folks in the room. Okay, awesome. So in the meantime, as folks continue to join, please share with us in our chat where you're from, where you're joining from. Feel free to share your name or the organization that you work with. Please communicate with us in the chat and let us know where you are from. We still have a few folks joining. Welcome. Thank you so much. If you are just now joining our webinar, we are asking folks to sound off in the chat to share a little bit more of where you're from, where you are joining from today, and the organization that you're with. Thank you so much for being here with us. Awesome. All right. So as people continue to enter and sound off in the chat, welcome. Hey, everyone. We are going to launch a poll. A short poll just to get a better understanding of folks who are joining your experience with web archiving. Today's conversation is about web archiving tools. And before we jump into showcasing those tools, we definitely want to hear from you all who are in the room about your level of experience. That will also help us guide the conversation and give us a little more insight into what folks are familiar with. Okay, awesome. All right, thank you all for responding to the poll. The numbers are rolling in. We're just going to wait for a few more folks to respond. But it does seem like the vast majority of folks who are joining us today are new to web archiving, which is great because this is an introductory conversation and workshop. And we're going to just let a few more folks respond. We're going to give you all 60 seconds or 30 seconds to continue responding. And then we'll end the poll so we can go ahead and get started. But overall, from the responses that are rolling in, we have a lot of newbies, and we have a few folks who have a general understanding of web archiving. Awesome. Beautiful. So we have most folks who responded. As I mentioned before, a great amount of us in the room are novices to web archiving or beginners, and that's totally perfect because we want to make sure that we're making all of our workshops accessible to beginners. And for those of you all who are joining us for the first time, this is the Archiving the Black Web team. We have our co-founders, Makiba and Burgess. Zakia is our program director. I'm the web archivist here. We have Dr. Meredith Clark, who is a research lead. We have Holly Smith, who is our project partner, Derek Mosley, who's a project partner, and Youssef as well, who's a project partner. Now, as I mentioned before, this webinar is a part of the Freedom School series, which is a 6-part introductory webinar series open to anyone interested in learning how to archive Black culture as it exists on the web today, which is inspired by the Freedom Schools of the 1960s civil rights movement. The series is really focused on providing accessible and practical training in digital cultural preservation. And today's conversation is about web archiving tools. Just wanted to lift this up again that this is part of our summer series. So today we have our web archiving tools webinar. We also have you coming up this month as well. The next is archiving websites and archiving social media. Feel free to scan this QR code on the bottom right where you can continue to register for additional webinars. I'm going to pause this screen for a second so folks can web archive. You also see the bit.ly link at the bottom, and you can also visit our website, archivingtheblackweb.org, and you can register there as well in the events section. And we have a series of fall webinars as well, continuing the conversation after we have an understanding of what are the web archiving tools, how to capture websites, and how to web archive social media. We will also be hosting conversations in the fall about preserving and web archiving digital collections, how to build web archive collections, and how to also have your storage backups and repositories to preserve all of the web archive collections that you will build through this webinar series. And I'm going to hold this screen again so that you all can click that QR code to go ahead and register. Perfect. So today who we have here with us on our side, myself, I'm the web archivist here at Archiving the Black Web. We also have Zakia joining us, who's the program director, and our esteemed panelist, who is a web archivist, and also one of our work school educators, we have Lorena Ramírez-López. Thank you so much, Lorena, for joining us today. We are super excited to get into this conversation.
Hi, Camille. Yes, thanks for the introduction, and I'm very excited to be here in the space with you all. And without further ado, let's just dive into the web. So, by definition, web archiving is the process of collecting portions of the World Wide Web. And while the web is often used synonymously with the internet, the web is actually one of the many applications that runs on the internet's infrastructure. So we don't have to worry about archiving all of that. We can just focus on the parts of the web that relate to our mission statements and our collections. Next. Okay. So the web is comprised of a bunch of websites that users can access on their local computers and other devices like your phones or tablets through the internet. To break it down from a high level, here's how many different elements actually eventually lead to the web and by extension, web archiving. So the web server is a computer system that will store all the websites and handle the traffic from multiple computers. And websites are a collection of related web pages under a single domain name. So a domain name is just a human readable address for a website on the internet like google.com or archivingtheblackweb.org, right? So each web page represents a single part of a website, and it takes many pages to build a complete site. And each web page is made up of many, many, and many web documents. So this includes your HTML, which is your hypertext markup language, which gives the site its structure, cascading style sheets, or CSS, which makes our website looks nice and pretty, JavaScript, which gives the site user interactivity. Like if you go on Instagram and you as a user, you need to scroll down to get more content. So like that scrolling, that is JavaScript. That is user behavior. And there are a lot of other sources added to make a site better, funner, and of course, more user-friendly. Next, please. So a lot of these other sources are digital file formats. So each of these file formats make up a part of a web page, and that needs to get archived. And often these sources aren't on the same server. So your documents might come from a blogging site, your images might come from Flickr or Instagram, your videos might be on YouTube. And so your browser, in order to render the web page adequately, needs to make thousands of what we call HTTP requests to display it. Next, please. So now HTTP or hypertext transfer protocols are the foundation of data communication on the World Wide Web. You might recognize it as like HTTP or HTTPS when you put in a URL in your web browser, and the S for HTTPS just stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secured. And so on the web, there are two types of HTTP messages. A request, which is made by a client, which is us from our computer. We make requests via web browsers, and the server will respond back with a response with the content that we want. And so each aspect of that web page, so the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, the images, the text, the fonts, the videos, all of that are single HTTP requests for each item, which the browser will get and display. Next slide, please. So while we're at it, a screenshot, while super easy and really good in a pinch, web archiving is not just archiving content, but also these HTTP messages, right? So while a screenshot is accessible and does so show a portion of your website, you can't capture these protocols with a screenshot. So while great for maybe putting it in your report, as part of a web archive, it is not, unfortunately.
Thank you for clarifying that, Lorena. And as you all know, at Archiving the Black Web, a lot of our work is focused on capturing and preserving the Black web. And so I think it's important that we always lift up these conversations to affirm that, yes, we may be used to screenshotting and capturing PDFs and exporting them. But as Lorena stated and laid out, the file formats that are sustainable for web archiving and suggested for web archiving are not PDFs and are not screenshots of the web.
Yeah, instead, they are work and waxy files. That's why when we, as a web archiving community, it was agreed that the work file or the web archive file would be used for storing websites. It is ISO, or the International Organization for Standardization, and ISO 28500, which you can read the technical paper if you want it on the International Internet Preservation Consortium website. And when you all embark on your web archiving journey, you will realize very quickly that work files can get very chunky. So the Web Recorder team, which is a company that provides open source web archiving tools, created the Waxy, or Web Archive Collection zipped file, that literally just like zips those work files into a shareable and indexable file.
Thank you so much for laying that out, Lorena. And so, for all of you all joining us here today, and getting an understanding that a lot of us are beginners or just getting familiar with web archiving, please let us know in the chat, why should we archive the web, or what on the web is important to you to web archive? It could be a personal portfolio, it could be to preserve history, whatever you think. We want to hear from you directly. Why should we be archiving anything on the web? We're going to give you all a few minutes to let us know in the chat.
all of these responses are great and definitely very common user scenarios, like saving personal blog posts and digital writing, exactly that. Like you're putting your words on a platform and, no one really reads those terms and conditions. So you need to have that in case they want to go down. We have preserving community history, very important. Like that's one thing that both Camille, myself, and archiving the Black Web team, community is very important. And if you're going to be archiving community resources and websites, being part of those conversations and being part of the community is very important. Government sites that might change or be taken down, that is very, very important in contemporary preserving research. Let's see. I love this hashtag bitrot, exactly that. And that's like through no fault of like anyone, is just that bit deciding to be a bit and flipping or doing whatever.
Absolutely. And whatever our concerns are in preserving the web, we all have unique user cases. And so, what we're going to talk about now is share a little bit about different user groups of folks who are actively preserving information on the web. So we have librarians who are crawling university websites on a regular basis and preserving social media presence. We also have journalists who are publishing work or publishing videos online, and they are crawling the web on a weekly basis and preserving interviews and their different news platforms. We also have marketing teams who are publishing content for their companies or along social media, and it is required for them at the end of the year to have audits to showcase what their digital web presence were for their different initiatives. We also have creatives like photographers who are preserving the web of their content that is published, whether it's in magazines or on their personal profiles on social media campaigns. And we have students as well who are learning about web archiving in real time, and are preserving anything on the web that is remotely important to them. Now that we've given you a little bit of background of what the definition is of web archiving and the types of user groups, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to Lorena, where she's going to talk and give us an overview about the range of web archiving tools that exist, and how some individuals utilize them.
Ooh, yes. Hello again. So we'll go over some web archiving tools that have graphic user interfaces or GUIs. There are plenty of web archiving tools that you can access through Terminal if you're using Mac, or Command Prompt if you're using Windows, which is usually like that little black box that your computer has so you can code on. If you ever watched Mr. Robot, that's what he's on all the time in the series. But for the sake of time and to address all levels of web archiving, we're just going to go over tools with these graphic user interfaces. And all the information of these tools are from their sites. So besides two or three tools, the majority of them are subscription based, but these are the tools that have GUIs and are available for web archiving. And so we'll start with Web Recorder, which is a company that was started in 2014 that has a bunch of open source web archiving tools. And two of them, which we highlight, are Archive Web Page and Replay Web Page. So Archive Web Page, for anyone who uses a Chrome browser, if you go to the Chrome store, you can download this extension in as is easy as a click, and you can start archiving. So if anyone wanted to try that as they were, listening to, this webinar, or if they want to try it afterwards, highly recommend, because it's one of those accessible free tools that you can like start web archiving now. And replay web page is actually how you would render or display and replay what you just captured. So usually when we talk about web archiving, we always just talk about the capturing part, like getting all the crawls, getting all the content that we see on the website. But we usually forget, how are we going to show this to people? How are people going to access it? And there are less tools, or there are tools that are incorporated within these web archiving tools, but replay web page is one where you can like literally go on your browser, type in replay web page, and if you had a work file or wanted to test a work file, you can just upload and view it. So these are two good, easy tools that you can start with and, get your feet wet as, that expression is and start web archiving. So, like I mentioned, Web Recorder is a company that does open source tools. Another open source tool, but that's subscription based, is Browser Tricks. And when you'll see when you do archive web page, it's very manual. And if it was a website with like a couple of pages, that's fine. But as we saw, websites are made up of a lot of web pages and are made up of a lot of web documents. So Browser Tricks is one of these open source tools that has what we call like an automated crawler. So a crawler is just a little spider or a little bot that will go out to the web. You give it parameters and guidelines, and it will go to a site and start making all these requests and gathering all that information. And then you have a nice little work file at the end. And Browser Tricks um, has also is one of the tools that has quality assurance like baked into it, which is really, really nice because if not, you'll be doing a lot of your QA manually and it will be very tedious. So it's a really good feature to have. And Archivit, which is one of like the OG tools that a lot of us know and recognize because it comes from Internet Archive. This is their web archiving tool. This is also a subscription based that you can see that has different packages, but similar to Browser Tricks and a lot of these other tools, it sends out a crawler and it goes to these sites. Archivit is because it's part of Internet Archive, gets backed up nicely as and access your digital storage. So Archivit started in like 2000 something, but Internet Archive, as we know, is like 1996, 1997. And this is the company that also started the work file. This is how we recognize that a work will be a standardized format. So Archivit, nice user interface, and also great support team. Camille, should I handle some of the questions that I see, or should we wait?
I think we can, if everyone, feel free to add your questions here because Lorena is going to do a short demo and we're going to hold some extra space at the end to review everyone's questions because some of them may be answered during the demo. So you can continue to ask questions. We will go through them for sure.
Perfect. Yeah, I see them. I see them. So don't worry. Like they will be answered. So Page Freezer, another subscription-based tool. The, yeah, there's not much I can say besides what's on their website. We know the team, they're really nice, but again, it just uses a crawler. What I will say that they are really into the compliance and really take the standards and record keeping for auditing very seriously. So that's one of the really good features that I would highlight from using Pave Freezer if you were to subscribe and work with them.
Yeah, and just also add for companies like Page Freezer, it seems like a lot of their language is supporting folks who have compliance that are larger corporations and organizations like legal folks or folks who are in larger law firms. And so, as you all are exploring these tools independently on your own, you may see language that is tailored to specific user groups, but that doesn't mean that you yourself cannot also utilize that software.
Yes, so Archivebox is similar to Web Recorder, where it's an open source software company and we'll talk about open source in a little bit, but you're able to access the code and self-host by yourself. So it is one of the options. It's a little bit more technical, but it really helps having these options where, you'll have control and autonomy over the tool that you're using and how your work files get saved. And then MirrorWeb. So another software company that if you want to use it, you'll have to subscribe and talk with them to get a sort of package. But similar to all of these tools, this will have automated crawlers, so you don't have to do all of this manually, and you'll be able to have access to your work files and replay them in the system that the software that it has. Okay, so I mentioned open source, and I just wanted to clarify that um, open source is kind of like that analogy, free puppies, where it's like I can give you free, like a free puppy, but there's a lot of maintenance and upkeep. So open source software is just that the copyright holder or the programmer gives you access to the code. So you can use it, you can modify it, you can distribute it. And unlike proprietary software, the code of open source is freely available for everyone, but that means that you need to maintain it. You need to figure out all the documentation. You need to figure out um, what can be done and adapt it to how you need it. Um, Open source software also doesn't necessarily mean that it's free. It's often free, but like I mentioned, like the upkeep and the time, like that's the give and take of getting free access to this software, but how are you maintaining it? How are you setting up your storage? So while there are a lot of options available, you really need to like rely on that community to get that support to be able to use some of these tools.
Also wanted to lift up as well. Thank you so much, Lorena, for laying out all these tools. When it comes to open source, depending on the tool itself, there are different levels of difficulty, right? So some browser extensions that may be open source that you can access through Google Chrome may be easy to utilize. Whereas if you all are choosing a specific tool that has like a large amount of code on GitHub or is in their documentation. If you don't have the experience of being a web developer, or if you are not well versed in some of those different code languages like CSS or JavaScript, etc., you would most likely need assistance. And so, since the vast majority of users here are beginners on this call, I would suggest that you lean into the tools that are cloud-based or web-based or subscription-based or are a free browser extension so that you don't get tangled into languages that you're not familiar with. But as we continue to roll out this webinar series, we will get more in-depth and granular about the type of tools that work for different types of web archiving efforts, right? Today's conversation is really giving you all an overview. Our follow-up webinars are very specific, just about archiving social media, just about archiving websites. And so we're going to answer all the questions that continue to roll in, but also just wanted to encourage you all to continue to register for the upcoming webinars because that's where we will really get into the detailed workflows and intricacies about what platform and tool may be best for you for your specific use case. And so this is a great time to segue into some unique user stories about why people may be archiving what they publish online. So let's use Amanda, for example. Amanda is a writer, a journalist, and a music blogger. She has been publishing content online for various news websites and media websites and all across social media. She's in the process of applying for a new position as an editor-in-chief of a music magazine. Now, before her interview, she needs to provide them with a portfolio of her published work. Now, Amanda's old laptop was damaged, where all of her original pieces were written, and she can no longer access those documents and those PDFs. And so, because she doesn't have the original documents, her work is still publicly available online. This is an example where Amanda could go ahead and do research to pull all of her published work across various media sites, various social media platforms. She can go ahead and copy and paste those website URLs to create a list. And once she has that list together, she can go ahead and choose her web archiving tool of choice. She can begin web archiving her published work. And when she gets ready for that job interview, what she can do is go ahead and provide a replay tool of all of her work that is publicly available. I want everyone to remember and keep in mind that URLs are unstable, digital file formats are unstable in juxtaposition to physical file formats. In the 1800s, a book was a book, and in 2025, it's still going to be a book. Whereas a website in 2001 is not going to be the same accessible, readable, and discoverable as it would be in 2025. And so, since Amanda's publications were in the past 5 years, she can see that they are still publicly available. And while they're publicly available, she can go ahead and web archive them in her tool of choice to be better prepared for her interviews and also to have a record of the work that she's contributed and to preserve her intellectual property as a writer. So, this is an example of why Amanda would be web archiving. Now we have another unique story where Tariq is an artist, is a graphic designer, and a web developer. He has been creating digital graphics and illustrations for a small design firm for 5 years. He's really now passionate about creating his own business where he wants to help smaller businesses rebrand their digital presence online. He's going to provide them a range of services, creating logos and websites and unique brand kits. Now, he himself, Tariq, is ready to launch his business, but the missing piece that he hasn't put on his website yet is showcasing all the work that he's designed in the past 5 years. Now, he doesn't have the original graphics saved, right? Because he created these at the firm that he was working at. But all of those websites and logos that he created are still publicly available online. So, what would Tariq do? Tariq would literally think about the same ways that Amanda's thinking. Tariq is going to go online to all of those companies. He is going to pull all of those social media posts, those marketing campaigns, those websites, and those graphics that are publicly available. He's going to go ahead and create a list of all of those URLs. And once he's gathered that list, he's now going to think about what is the best tool of choice. Now, different from Amanda, Tariq also has a web developer background. So, whereas Amanda may use a subscription based web archiving tool, right, because she doesn't have these developer backgrounds, Tariq may be able to find a free open source tool that he's going to deploy locally on his computer. So, as he continues doing work for his future business, he can go ahead and web archive everything that he's creating on his local device and also on the web. And so Amanda and Tariq are both in two different industries. They have two different use cases, but there is a value in why they need to preserve the content that they create, not only for their own personal portfolios, but to also help them move their individual careers forward. Now, in a moment, I'm going to pass this webinar over to Lorena, where she's going to actually showcase a tool and archive a website. But it is important for us to think about before we choose our web archiving tool of choice, there's just a few steps we want you to be mindful of and consider. So, similar to Amanda and Tariq, who had to go and create a spreadsheet, we are encouraging that before you choose your web archiving tool of choice, you should be intentional about what you want to preserve. And that process is pretty simple, especially for beginners who are joining us today. So I would recommend step one, you can create a spreadsheet with a few different columns. And in each column will be defined to column 1A can have the website URL, column B can have that website title, column C, you should put the date that you've accessed it. Column D can have the description and notes, giving more context to what this website is and why you're archiving it. And the next column, you should take intentional notes about permissions. We've mentioned this before in our webinars, and we will continue to have these conversations because it is a challenge for everyone who is web archiving about the permissions. Whereas if you're preserving a website like Amanda or Tariq for your own personal portfolio, that's different. Whereas if you're someone who wants to web archive intellectual property that's not your own and you're trying to monetize it, that is a red flag. And so it's important to keep track of permissions of different websites. So after you are done web archiving, you can think intentionally about where you're sharing these and where you're publishing them. The second thing you want to do is gather the list of URLs that you want to web archive. Then you can go ahead and select your web archiving tool of choice. Now, every tool has different workflows, has different best practices, and so we really encourage you to review the tool's documentation and their suggested best practices. From the tools that we've listed today, a significant amount of those best practices are public facing on their websites, but you also do have the agency to reach out to someone there. It can be an info or support email to ask them to provide best practices or best workflows. And once you've gotten to that point where you have information about the tool, you can go ahead and launch the software. And since you already have the websites and the URLs that you're interested in preserving, you can go ahead and start archiving the web. And so at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Lorena. And what Lorena is gonna do is she's gonna lead us through a live demo. And while she is doing so, we are going to go ahead and also look through the questions, and we'll come back to circle back to answer any questions that may not have been addressed or may be missed during Lorena's demo. So thank you so much, Lorena.
Yes. So I'm going to share my screen and you just let me know if y'all can see it. Yes. Perfect. And I do want to address really quickly before we dive in one of the questions where, since these are websites, how can they archive the web? Or is it because they turn into the sites into work? So, great question, because it's kind of like a very nested answer or like way of thinking. So, the same way, you share a link to a website to a person, you're not saying like this is the entire web. This is just a site on the web. And so when we make our web archives or our collections, we're we're curating um we're curating these sites so that are part of our mission, that are part of, you know, our goals or within the scope of our collection. So if I had a collection, I have a collection of Paraguayan cinema, right? So my collection is about specifically cinema from Paraguay that are on the web. So I would go to different sites and, capture those, and it's part of my collection. And so I'm only showing a portion of the entire web, but curated so it can highlight and showcase Paraguayan cinema. So, like, yes, a single work file isn't, archiving the web, but it's just a portion that will grow into a bigger collection. I hope that kind of answered it and it wasn't really rambly. But when we look at the technical side of this, maybe it will um, put more things into perspective. So one of the tools that we have access to, and that's a subscription base that you can do a free trial on, is Browser Tricks. So when you log in, this is the dashboard. And so a lot of it, whenever you use a new tool, you should read the documentation because terms and definitions might be a little bit different using each tool, but ideally it's the same concept. So this dashboard is broken down into storage. So work files, these files will take up space. So how much space do you have in your storage? Crawling, it's so here in the browser tricks, crawling is broken down into time. So how long is the crawler out in the world trying to capture all of the aspects of a website? And then collections, which I can just show you here because it's easier. It will make more sense. Collections is basically I will create a specific theme and I would add all these archived items, which are the crawls, to said collection. And we'll do that together. So let's say I want to archiving the Black website, right? So one thing that I recommend is, we have quality assurance in some tools, but you can also do a quality assurance of the tool yourself by analyzing the web page. So, because a lot of web pages look very simple sometimes, deceptively simple, and they aren't. So for this archiving the Black web, I see like there's a nav bar, there's search, there's images, text, right? There's a bunch of hyperlinks because I can click on something and then it'll take me to something else. So what I like to do sometimes is if when you're on a browser, so right now I'm on a Chrome browser, but you can do the same with Mozilla or Edge. a lot of browsers have this, is if you right click, you can inspect, and then you get to see the actual structure, the HTML structure of that website's code. So if you have time, it's fun to do, but you don't have to do this with every site. And so I can see if I just collapse everything, each web page will start with doc type HTML. So if you ever come across a website that doesn't have it, that's like not abiding by the standards and protocols, but each of these should. We got some nice metadata where the language is English from the United States. Head is the section that we don't see on the website, but it's all like the metadata and information that will help with the structure of the site. So I can see the title, it's like about, right? So if you can see about ATBW. So like this, if I wanted, I can say hello. I'm not changing the actual code, but you can see how this text, this of the code, like affects what we see rendered on our browser. So like, don't worry, Sakia and the rest of the ATBW team, I did not hack your site. It's still there, it's still good. The code is fine. Because that code is saved on a server. What I see on my site is what my browser requested and I see rendered on the browser. So if we can kind of go back to the home where I see a lot of these great photos, if I hover over one, I can see this is an image and I see its source, it's a PNG, right? So we were talking about how web pages are made up of a lot of web documents. So here we got a photo, and H3 is just like if you ever had MySpace or like LiveJournal, these are just like HTML terms for like headers of like how big and small something can be. So here we have, it's also hyperlinked, which is nice. So project partner over here. And we see like if I go over here, so Camille Web Archivist, if there we go, and be like, all the best, yay. So this is whenever you need to troubleshoot and because you were archiving something and you didn't capture it, this is where I would recommend you kind of debug and troubleshoot if you had the time and a good soundtrack because it will take some time. So let's just archiving the Black Web site. So we'll go to this corner where it says create new. And if you click on it, you can create a new crawl workflow. You can upload, you can create a new collection, or you can create a new browser profile. So for our purposes, we want to capture this site. So we're going to create a crawl workflow. And this crawl workflow is basically giving the instructions to the crawler on which site to start with and like how far it should get captured, how far it should captured. So in a crawl scope, do we want to do a single page, which sometimes we might just want to do like a single post if it's meant for something very specific, but usually we want to capture like the whole website because a single page won't encompass exactly how, important the website can be. So we can do same directory. So that basically means that whatever comes after that slash in my URL is going to get captured. So if you went back here, right, this is the starting URL. But then if I clicked on about, my path changes, right, to like slash about. Or if I go to here, it'll switch to slash work school, right? So I'm basically telling the crawler, hey, anything within this directory that goes slash whatever, please capture it. We can also say, whatever's under the same domain, right? So this domain will automatically also capture some of the, so admit, sorry. Well, we'll also capture it, but the domain is just the archiving the Black Web. It seems a little bit redundant with like this website, but it makes more sense if you went to social media accounts like Instagram, where I'm not logged into anything, but right, this is my account, which it's private. But if we went back here, it's like the same domain. I'm telling the crawler, hey, you're gonna get everything off on Instagram besides my site, which we wouldn't really want. But we would want like the same directory. So it would get my Instagram account. But we're only doing archiving the Black Web right now because there's a whole nother section on web archiving social media, right? So scope depth, how many hops? So hops is what we call whatever hyperlink. And so if that hyperlink links to another hyperlink to another hyperlink, um, don't worry, I did not forget the slash because I only want the domain. But if I wanted, it's okay because like I know it's really small right now. But if even if I added the slash because it's domain based, .org. But I'm loving this. Like we always need extra eyes because sometimes if it's going through the workflow, it's like what happened? It's like you see like there's multiple steps. So it's just always good to keep track of like what step was I on that I messed up. But right now we're good. So scope. So the hops, like yeah, Camille, sorry.
Yeah, no, no, no. I just wanted to lift up that I do know we maybe have like 10 minutes left for questions. And also wanted to just remind everyone in the room we're all beginners. And so I know you're going to have more burning questions about all these different specifications
Right.
that Lorena's laying out. I just wanted to, to encourage us to maybe skip over to running a crawl because some of those intentional detail workflows we'll get into. And I also want to answer some questions that people are lifting up. So I didn't want to interject, but
Please do. Thank you. Because as you can see, I got really into this and I forget. So all these fun stuff, all with great documentation. Any tool that you use, if it doesn't have easy or accessible documentation, run away. I mean, you might still have to use it, but good documentation is always good to have. So I'm just going to start running the crawl. Ta-da! And so the crawler will start like looking at all the instructions that I kind of gave it. We'll go to the site and eventually when I will say browser tricks is one of also the very few tools that you can see live your crawling status. Usually with all these other tools, you won't be able to see anything. It's just like you let your little crawler off and then you just wait back for a report and then all your websites to get crawled.
thank you. Oh,
And there we
see,
go.
here it
Yeah.
goes.
Right? It's exciting when you can see it, but this is not the norm. So it's real. This is why browser tricks is one of like the tools that is fun to use because then you can see it go off and your crawler doing its little work.
And
And with that, I'm
so
going to stop sharing my screen.
as yeah, so as the crawler continues to go ahead and work, it's going to go ahead and crawl that website. When it's done, it is going to close up that archived URL and it's going to create it as an archived item. That file format in browser tricks is going to be finished as a waxy file, right? Whereas other different platforms may still traditionally use a work file. So from like the 90s to the 2000s, the preferred file format was a work. Now we have new technologies like browser tricks that allow us to have a waxy file where it's just compressed. And you can also expand it and add more descriptions and metadata about the completed archived item. I just want to go through the chat to lift up some questions that people had that were not able to be fully answered. And so okay, thank you, Charla. So that is a good valid question. What if some of these web archiving tools no longer exist, right? What if they become obsolete? What if they don't function anymore? The file formats themselves that you create are still valid. So, for example, what if Google Docs shut down one day? That doesn't mean that all of the documents and PDFs that you've saved from Google Docs is not still a valid file format. That would still be alive. Same thing goes for any software platform. We used to use different social media platforms and we saved those pictures on our phones. We still have those pictures. We're just not publishing them on the platform. Um, Someone asked a question specifically, and I want to be able to answer. Now, we can't predict. We don't have insight on when web archiving tools shut down, but most of them that have shut down in the past will give an announcement and sometimes recommend other tools that are their partners or other strong, legitimate tools. Also, want to lift up and remember, right? If something is cloud-based and it does have an open source, you can always transition into that Or you don't have to do it in isolation. You can join a cohort. You can register for work school next year to learn how to do these things intentionally. You can also collaborate with other archives and libraries and museums who may be lifting up these web archiving opportunities. Jemmy Murphy asked a question. So, how can journalists come back with old political social media posts from various celebrities? If you are a journalist who is interested in archiving the political landscape on the web, specifically from the point of view of a celebrity, and that's part of your reporting, you can go ahead and just pull all of the URLs where those celebrities are making comments, whether they're endorsing them, whether they're, pushing back against them. And you can go into this any web archiving tool of choice, and put those URLs in, and you can use that. What I can share is there's so many different types of people archiving the web for a wide range of different reasons. Yeah. There are some large institutions who are web archiving their nation's political process from start to finish. And they're in relationship with the politicians and they're in relationships with the government in order to do so. There are individual artists, like we've seen, like Tariq, who are capturing web archiving information on the web for their own personal purposes.
Camille,
And
can I hop in here?
sure.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's Zakia off screen. Yeah, I'll just add to that a lot of big uh, news outlets do have their own web archiving practices and use different tools, whether commercial tools or internally developed tools in order to web archive the content that they are producing. And so, we can also archive things from like New York Times, for example, but they are definitely have their own web archiving practices. We are not like sort of in a case where we are worried about like we could lose the entire New York Times like digital archive. They are handling that. But yeah, so sometimes that is how journalists can sort of pop up with receipts because they have been doing web archiving, usually internally, about content they've created, but perhaps they are extending their web archiving practices to social media posts or going, the traditional OG route of screenshots, which we are all familiar with. But that is not web archiving. I must reiterate that at all times. And I also wanted to chime in on the question about like if these platforms go down, really thinking about, like you said, Camille, and I think it connects to an earlier question about, um, how are we web archiving if these things are still happening in the browser and we're like reviewing them or replaying them in the browser. And just that it's very similar to how we create something in Google Docs and we may download it as a PDF or we download it as a doc file or we download it as a spreadsheet. And so we've essentially transformed it from its web-based view to a different file format that is preservable. So files are able to be preserved and work is cousins with PDF, it's cousins with DocX, cousins with XLS, XLSX, or what have you, and JPEG, all of those are able to be preserved, even though we can then pull PDFs up back in the browser again. We are also able to preserve a PDF on a server or a hard drive. Um, and so we do this all the time. It just seems so different when we're talking about like a website that is dynamic and moves around, but we are familiar with the process of converting, a live web page or something we created in a browser to a preservable file format. It just seems so different, but it's not because we're using a tool, but it's not.
Thank you so much, Zakia, for chiming in and also affirming the file formats. We are at our 1 hour mark, but if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. For folks who have a hard stop at 3, we want to thank you so much for joining us for part 1 of the Freedom series. Now, the next conversation will be about archiving a website. So we encourage you, I'm going to drop the chat here, to register for the additional webinars. So the next webinar is taking place on Monday, July 21st about archiving websites. The following webinar will take place on Wednesday, August 6th about archiving social media. So those burning questions that you have, bring those to the website's webinar. The burning questions you have about social media, bring that to that as well. And in the fall, we have a larger conversation about now, once you've learned how to web archive, how do you build collections? And then how do you preserve those collections? And how do you back them up? And so our goal is to teach you all just an overview, what are the tools and how to preserve them. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. You all are amazing. We're really excited to continue to share resources with you and empower you. Thank you so much, Lorena, for bringing your expertise. And thank you all, everyone who, we got a lot of familiar faces in the room. Thank you all so much. Y'all are the best. And we hope you continue to stay connected with us at Archiving the Black Web for more educational content. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful week.